invented.
Now,
Living in a great big way.
one more, boy.
Living in a great big way. Louis.
Today I'm going to show you the basic supplies that you might want to have on hand to start watercolor. I'm going to give you a couple options, and my basic encouragement though is to start what you have. It doesn't have to be fancy, and I don't have really specific recommendations, but I'm going to show you options so that you can choose for yourself what you like to start with. So the first way that watercolor comes, that probably you started with if you had art as a kid in school, is the pan options. So the pigment is loaded into a pan. This is a nice version that I've used. You can see I've used it up, but I keep it because they last forever. Not forever, but they last a long time. So even though this is a really limited color palette, you can use it and you can mix these colors and you can create really beautiful things. I can show you how to use these basic colors and create really beautiful paintings. The important thing with pans, this is my recommendation, get ones with really good pigment. If you notice how brilliant those colors and how rich they are, that's what's going to make a good painting. If you get a pan that looks really chalky and not pigmented, then the color that it produces, you know, when you add water, it's going to wash out. The color that it produces is not going to be great. So my recommendation if you're going to buy them this way, which is totally fine, is to look for really good pigment. That's what's going to make good colors. I'm going to show you another option. So here's one. This is the Koi brand. I've had this one for a really long time, and I'm still using it. I created lots of paintings. You see how nice the pigment is? This one gives you a nice variety of colors. I always like to have a couple yellows and some good green options. I don't usually use them straight from the pan. I usually mix, and you can see this one comes with a little mixing tray. I will tell you more about that in the tutorials. I'm going to teach you how to mix colors. So the pans are the first options. The second option is to buy watercolor in its liquid form in tubes. Here are a couple that I just got, a pink and a green. You can buy these individually, or you can buy them in sets of colors, and they'll come with basic colors. And a lot of artists have favorite pigments that they love to use, that they like to keep on hand. I'm going to give you a printable list of the colors that I like to have on hand. I always like a good pink, and I always like a good green and a good yellow. You want to have the basic colors. You can mix the other ones, but some of them you really need to start with a good color to get the result you want. Other than that, a lot of the colors you can mix yourself. So you do not use this paint directly on your painting. You would want to put it on a palette, and then you add water. You can add water when it's still wet, or you can add water once they've dried. They'll work the same. You just have to be careful when it's still in a liquid state. You don't want to use it straight from that. It would be too thick. So what I like to do is I like to squeeze out the colors onto a palette. Here's one that I've made. This is a nice big palette. I put these colors on probably a year ago, and I kind of separated them out by color, and then I used the middle to mix. This is really dirty. I need to clean it off so that I can get some clean colors. But this is basically what I often use. I also use a lot of these little white trays. I like the ceramic finish and I like to use white so that you can see the color really well. You could use any plate that you have. I prefer white just so you can see what color you're mixing. So in addition to somewhere to mix color, I like to have little strips of paper available kind of next to my painting to test my colors when I mix them. So next you're going to want to have a glass of water. This is just regular cup of water, any kind of water. I love yogurt tins. I love reusing yogurt tins. And then you're going to have brush. My favorite brushes are these round tipped brushes. I'll put some links below, but I usually use maybe a large one, a medium one, and a smaller one. I really don't use more than this for my paintings. They come in different sizes, kind of depending on how large you're painting, or if you're doing really small details, you would want a smaller brush, but I like these best. This is what I'll be using in the tutorials, the rounded tip brushes. Some of them, they can get very expensive. You know, you can have brushes made from hair or animal hair, or brushes that are more plastic based. I'm not super picky. I just have ones of my own that I like and that are my favorite go-to brushes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about watercolor paper. I'm going to show you a piece of watercolor paper. Watercolor paper, if you can see, it's a little thicker than the normal paper that you would use. A lot of times one side will be really flat and one side will be a little bit toothy. The toothy side is the one that you paint on. It's made so that the watercolor, when you put it on the paper, it will kind of sit there and it won't immediately absorb into the paper. So that allows you to work with it a little bit as you're putting color on. You can mix while it's wet, and then it will dry with a beautiful edge to it. You can also, even after it's dry, if it's this good thick paper, you might be able to go up and rework something. I don't like to do that very often because I like it to look more natural and unworked, but that is something that you can do with watercolor paper. But you don't have to use watercolor paper, and I'm going to show you a couple other options. If you do choose to use watercolor paper, I often work with a Canson watercolor paper. This Fabriano paper is really nice as well. The price point on watercolor paper can be all over. You can get really expensive, beautiful watercolor paper. I like to do something that doesn't have a lot of texture on it because sometimes I'm making art prints or stickers from the things that I'm painting. So I like to kind of have a flat watercolor paper that doesn't have a lot of texture. Here's an example with watercolor paper. This one is on watercolor. This is on Canson watercolor paper. In addition, you might want to use just a mixed media paper. And if you can see here, the water has warped some of the pages. So that's going to be the difference with the different paper that that you use, is the water will warp the paper. And so the thicker you have it, the less that's going to happen. This one, I like this paper. It's not very thick. For just sketching or trying out ideas, I find like the mixed media is good for that. This is just a notebook of that. I think it's a Canson. Yeah, Canson mixed media. So if you're just wanting to practice and try things out, this kind of paper would be fine. You could also, I love to use old books. This is an old gardening encyclopedia that I got for free. The reason that I like this book is because the pages are nice and thick and they can take a lot of the water. So if you're wanting to use old books, don't go for something with thin pages. Look for something with thick pages. Here is an example of a painting on a book page. I used those a lot in the beginning because I was just painting and experimenting a lot, and I didn't want to keep wasting watercolor paper because it was expensive. So I was just, and this is actually on a thin page, but you can even experiment on that. This is, I think, in another encyclopedia page. Here's a little sketch I did. This is just on cardstock. So cardstock, which you can find at Walmart, you know, a big pack for like $8. This will work. You see it kind of warped the paper, but for something just to play on and learn, and for the projects that we're going to do, cardstock works fine. The watercolor does sit on cardstock a little bit differently than it would on watercolor paper, but I think just for doing something fun, cardstock works, and it's a step up from just printer paper. You could use printer paper, but sometimes if you're, you know, scrubbing it, and especially for kids, if they're putting a lot of pressure and kind of experimenting with brushing, then they'll put holes in the paper. Here's another book. This is something I thrifted. It's an antique music book that I've used for a lot of paintings. It has these beautiful thick pages, and the watercolor background kind of provides a really neat canvas to work on. So I enjoy that a lot. The other thing that you can do is I find these really old, like vintage chalkboards. What you can do is when you paint, you can tape the edges of your paper down on a board like this. It could even be, you know, a piece of cardboard. You can use some masking tape. You want something that's not going to rip your painting when you take it up. And so that'll depend on the kind of paper that you're using. Watercolor, usually you can use a tape like this, and the edge won't rip. You could use a painter's tape. I used to use, you know, the blue painter's tape a lot, and I would tape my paintings down. That helps keep them kind of flat. These days, I usually just paint on the watercolor paper and let it get rippled, and then I flatten it afterwards. I can tell you how to do that at some point. But basically, I wet the back of the paper lightly and then put it under a pile of books and let it dry flat. So I don't really worry about taping the edges of my paintings down these days. But we can talk about that more as we go along. The one other thing I want to show you is that I do have a drying tool, like a heat gun, and if I'm painting a lot, this is what I use for drying layers in between if I get impatient and don't want to wait for the layer to dry, or if it's really, really wet, because sometimes I work really, really wet. So I use this tool to dry the layers in between. So that's something you can work with, or you can just wait for them to dry. Sometimes I'll work on multiple paintings at a time, and I'll be letting one dry and working on one, and then switch them so that the layers can dry as I'm waiting. So I think those are all of the supplies that I wanted to show you today. If you have questions, let me know in the comments. Like I said, I'm going to put a list of supplies and some links where you can get them in the comments. And you can print this list out and find it, things that you need. But just remember, don't stress about it. Start somewhere, and then as you go along, learn what you like, learn what colors you like, and what kind of watercolor you want to use. Thanks, and have fun. Bye.